Toni Bertelet, a successful and beautiful woman, practiced as an oculist in Jackson, Mississippi. Known for her kindness and dedication, she was a well-regarded doctor who consistently achieved excellent outcomes for her patients. Toni genuinely loved people and dedicated her life to helping them. In 1999, at the age of 37, Toni's life took a turn when she met Harold Henthorne through an online dating site. After waiting patiently, Toni was hopeful that this encounter would lead her to the man of her dreams. From their very first meeting, Toni and Harold fell deeply in love. She depicted him as a kind, romantic, and exceptionally intelligent man. Henthorne, much like Toni, seemed to be a man who had found his footing in life, describing himself as an entrepreneur with his own company. His work involved fundraising for non-profit organizations. Before their paths crossed, both Toni and Harold had already experienced their first marriages. Toni's had ended in divorce, but Harold's story was markedly different. His first wife, Lynn Reshel, tragically passed away in 1995. Henthorne preferred not to dwell on the circumstances of his first wife's death. He confided in Toni that Lynn had perished in a car accident. She, sensitive to Harold's feelings, refrained from inquiring about his late first wife. In the year 2000, a year after they met, Harold and Toni exchanged vows. They relocated to an area of Denver, Colorado, where Harold had previously lived and fostered valuable professional connections. Toni found work at a local ophthalmology clinic, though she often longed for her family, her parents, and 2 brothers, and seized every chance to visit Mississippi. 5 years into their marriage, Toni gave birth to their daughter, Hallie, and felt completely fulfilled, having a loving husband, a successful career, and now, motherhood. Daniel Jarvis, a longtime friend of Harold's family, decided to relocate to Colorado. Harold and Toni welcomed him into their home for a few months. Daniel recounted a routine. Each morning, Toni would leave for work, while Harold retreated to the basement, surfacing only for lunch. Occasionally, Harold would embark on short trips away from their home. The year 2006 marked a grim turning point for the Hanton family. Toni's brother, Barry Bertelet, a renowned cardiologist, extended an invitation to Harold for a checkup, offering to use cutting-edge computed tomography for a comprehensive examination. The appointment revealed grave issues within Harold's health. Dr. Barry delivered the stark diagnosis. Harold had suffered a heart attack and required immediate hospitalization. Barry's intervention proved life-saving for his sister's husband. Then, in 2011, misfortune struck the Hanton family once more. In their mountain cabin, Toni and Harold were enjoying a quiet getaway when disaster struck. Toni was inside the cabin when she spotted something on the floor and bent down to pick it up. In that instant, a heavy wooden beam came crashing down, striking her head and fracturing her spine. The impact left her with a loss of sensation in her arms. Later that day, Harold's brother, Barry, contacted them. Harold, trying to downplay the situation, told him that it was nothing serious. Following an injury, Harold Henthorne underwent a disturbing transformation, becoming increasingly demanding and controlling towards his wife, Toni. He even restricted her phone conversations. Toni's brother, Barry, revealed the limited contact he had with his sister and niece only through speakerphone and always in Harold's presence. These calls were infrequent. Toni's colleagues also observed Harold's growing involvement in her life. He became a constant presence at meetings and physician gatherings. This behavior bred resentment among her co-workers, one woman confessing to an unsettling feeling about Harold. In September of 2012, Henthorne enlisted his assistant's help to plan a surprise for Toni. On their 12th wedding anniversary, Harold and Toni embarked on a journey to Rocky Mountain National Park, a sanctuary celebrated for its breathtaking beauty, awe-inspiring wildlife, and profound tranquility. On a crisp autumn day, September 29, 2012, the couple ventured onto a hiking trail within the park's embrace. As they ascended into the mountains, they veered off the marked path after traversing approximately 2 miles, venturing into the rugged, untamed terrain. Toni's ailing knees made the challenging route perilous. Later that day, her brother, Barry, received a message from Harold, conveying the dire news that his sister had been injured. and the situation was critical. The message arrived, a stark declaration. Toni was gone. She had fallen, they said, from a height of approximately 40 meters. Survival was impossible. Barry was left with the agonizing task of informing their parents that his 50-year-old sister was dead. Harold initially told the police that during their hike, Toni had lagged behind, her pace slow and labored. At one point, she vanished completely. He called out, searched frantically, and then, approaching the cliff's edge, he saw her fallen far below. The following day, at the police station, his story shifted. He recounted how he had been typing a message on his phone, looked up, and witnessed Toni plummet over the cliff. The man's story took another turn. He now claimed Toni had fallen while taking pictures of him, so engrossed in the task she hadn't noticed the cliff's edge. This marked the third distinct account Harold had given. While police initially attributed this to potential post-traumatic stress, believing he was simply reeling from the shock of the incident, detectives grew increasingly suspicious when, a mere 2 days after his wife's death, Harold began meticulously planning her funeral, selecting specific videos and songs for the service. 5 days following Toni Hanton's tragic death, a somber memorial service drew hundreds. Yet, even amidst the collective grief, whispers of unease began to surface. Her husband, Harold, had already cremated Toni, a decision that struck many as peculiar, given her Christian faith. The family had wanted a traditional burial, but Harold had been insistent. As investigators delved deeper, their suspicions grew. A hand-drawn map was discovered within Harold's Jeep, marked with an X precisely where Toni had fallen. This discovery added fuel to the family's suspicions that Harold knew more than he was letting on. Harold was genuinely frightened when his map was discovered. He confided in a friend, explaining that the map detailed the very trail he and his wife had intended to hike. Harold vehemently asserted to his friend that he could never harm his wife. The police station received approximately 16 calls and messages from Toni's colleagues and close friends, urging further investigation into her death and suggesting her husband might be involved. Detective Brian Mass, delving into Harold's background, unearthed a crucial detail. Harold's first wife had also died in an accident, after which he received a significant payout from an insurance company. Harold's first wife, Lynn Reshel, had worked as a social worker. They met in college and enjoyed 12 years of blissful marriage. Lynn's relatives remember her as a kind woman, deeply in love with her husband. Their life together was seemingly free of arguments, but everything changed on one fateful day. On the 6th of May, 1995, Lynn died under unusual circumstances. She was run over by her husband's Jeep. Harold Henthorne told police that he and Lynn had gone out for dinner and were driving along a dark road late at night. During the drive, Harold realized he had a flat tire. In the dead of night, he pulled over, the gravel crunching beneath the tires as he sought to change a flat. Lynn, he claimed, had been his steadfast helper, steadying the lug nuts as he loosened them. He recounted how his wife had fumbled, one nut slipping from her grasp and disappearing beneath the vehicle. She crawled underneath, reaching for the errant piece. It was then, Harold explained, that disaster struck. He tossed the flat tire aside, and in a cruel twist of fate, it struck Damcrat. The Jeep lurched forward, crushing her beneath its weight. Lynn's siblings found her death unsettlingly odd, yet the thought that Harold might be responsible never crossed their minds. Following the tragic incident, Hanton's narrative became a tangled web of inconsistencies. To one detective, he recounted a tale of returning from dinner, while to another, he claimed they were just heading out to a restaurant. He initially asserted that Lynn had screamed his name as the Jeep approached, only to later state she'd mentioned feeling something coming towards her. Harold initially claimed he pulled his wife's body from under the vehicle, but later attributed the act to passers-by. The sheriff's office investigated Lynn's death for 6 days, ultimately closing the case as an accident. 17 years after Toni's passing, Lynn's case resurfaced, stirring up old questions and doubts. 2 Mrs. Hantons met their ends under a shroud of mystery. Had the investigation into Lynn's death been thorough 17 years prior, perhaps Toni would still be alive. Detectives have reopened Lynn's case, meticulously sifting through every piece of evidence. A peculiar detail caught their attention. Harold had used an unsuitable jack for his vehicle. The jack that came standard with the Jeep was supposedly faulty. 17 years ago, the police had taken Harold's explanation at face value that the original Jeep jack was broken. It lay in the trunk. Perhaps it wasn't broken, and it worked perfectly fine. Harold's choice of jack for his vehicle raised eyebrows. It simply wasn't the right fit. Detectives also noted the car's position on a gravel road. A dropped nut, they reasoned, wouldn't have easily rolled under the vehicle on such an uneven surface. In December of 2014, Lynn Hanton's death, initially ruled an accident, was reclassified as undetermined. Simultaneously, another team pursued the 2012 case of Toni, meticulously piecing together the events leading to her demise. Investigators spoke with a friend of Hanton's, a former housemate, who revealed that Harold was employed by a non-profit focusing on fundraising efforts. The detective listened intently as his friend recounted the details. Afterwards, he revealed a startling piece of information. Hanton hadn't held a job in roughly 2 decades. It seemed Harold had ceased working approximately 3 years before the untimely death of his first wife. Investigators discovered the man had no recorded income in recent years, nor any accumulated savings. Toni's family expressed their shock and disbelief as they were entirely unaware of this. Harold had always managed the entire household budget. They believed he was employed, and he maintained complete control over the family's finances. Adding another layer of suspicion, the police considered the head injury Toni sustained during a mountain hike a year prior to her death might not have been an accident, but rather Harold's initial attempt to eliminate his wife. Following the death of his first wife, DeVetz received a substantial payout from the insurance company, amounting to $645,000. The demise of his second wife was set to bring him a windfall of several $1,000,000. Law enforcement grew suspicious, suspecting that Harold had deliberately orchestrated the deaths of his wives, envisioning a life of leisure funded by insurance payouts. The former daughter-in-law of Hanton shared a chilling account with the police. She revealed that the Federal Bureau of Investigation had informed her of a clandestine life insurance policy valued at $400,000, which Harold had taken out on her life. According to the woman, Harold had forged her signature, cunningly positioning himself as the sole beneficiary. She had unwittingly become potential victim number 3. In November of 2014, Harold Hanton faced arrest as the Federal Bureau of Investigation formally charged him with the premeditated murder of his wife, Toni Hanton. In September of 2015, the trial of Harold Henthorne commenced, shrouded in secrecy as cameras were barred from the courtroom. The prosecution asserted that Henthorne meticulously orchestrated his wife's demise to claim approximately $5 million in insurance benefits. The Federal Bureau of Investigation presented compelling evidence, utilizing Henthorne's cell phone records to demonstrate his repeated reconnaissance trips to the area where Toni tragically fell. Prior to the incident, he had visited the location, marked with a cross on a map, roughly 9 times. After his wife plunged from the 40-meter precipice, Harold made no attempt to rescue her. Furthermore, the woman's lipstick remained perfectly intact, suggesting that Harold did not attempt to administer cardiopulmonary resuscitation. Harold frantically texted his brother, Toni Barry, relaying the grim news. He had detected a faint pulse in her. A follow-up message moments later confirmed his worst fears. Her heart had stopped beating. A crucial piece of evidence emerged in the investigation. A map of the area where Harold had marked the precise location of Toni's death with an X. Adding to the intrigue, a friend of Harold's, who had briefly resided in his home, testified that Harold had attempted to convince him the map was created for him. The man had sought his friend's backing, attempting to align their narratives. The prosecution presented a compelling argument suggesting Harold Hanton may have pilfered a valuable item from his deceased wife. After the fall, Toni's wedding ring was found on her hand. Although her hand sustained minimal damage, the diamond was missing from her wedding ring, a diamond Harold estimated to be worth around $30,000. After an exhaustive search that spanned 8 long months, the precious gem remained elusive. It was a lone investigator revisiting the crime scene who finally stumbled upon the diamond lying innocently on the earth. The prosecution's theory painted a picture of Harold cunningly returning the gem to the scene in a calculated attempt to deflect suspicion. Adding to the weight of the allegations was the enigmatic death of Harold's first wife, Lynn, a chilling echo of events. In both instances, Harold's actions followed a disturbingly similar pattern. A key detail emerged. Henton had scattered the ashes of his 2 wives in the exact same location, separated by 17 years. Each of his marriages had lasted for 12 years. Despite the mounting evidence, Henton's attorney remained steadfast, proclaiming his client's absolute innocence. He felt no need to prove his innocence. That was the prosecution's burden. The defense rested without calling a single witness for Henton. After 10 hours of deliberation, the judge pronounced 59-year-old Harold Henton guilty in his wife's death, sentencing him to life imprisonment without parole. Tony Barry, a brother, often reflects on the time he saved Henton from a heart attack, wondering what might have been if he hadn't intervened. Barry confessed his thoughts. As a doctor, I felt bound by my oath to save him, yet a part of me yearned to bring my sister back. Haley Henton, the daughter of Tony and Harold, orphaned far too young, found herself living with family friends and relatives for a time. After her father's life sentence became final, Tony's brother, Barry Bertelet, a cardiologist, adopted Haley. Brian Trimble, 24, and Randy Peake, 25, had been married since the 9th of September in the year 2000. The newlyweds settled near Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. Their life together appeared to be a picture of marital bliss. Then, everything shifted in a single, fateful moment. 2 years into what seemed like a blissful marriage, Brian began to feel unwell. A persistent dizziness clouded his days. His hands often went numb, and he found himself stumbling unexpectedly. Concerned, Trimble sought medical advice, only to receive a devastating diagnosis: multiple sclerosis. Fear gnawed at him, the worry that Randy might leave him for someone healthier. To Brian's surprise, his spouse met the news with unwavering calm. Randy was familiar with the nature of the illness. While multiple sclerosis was incurable, with proper management, Brian could still live a long and fulfilling life. Nancy Chavez, Randy's mother, recounted a heartfelt conversation she once had with her daughter. She had gently inquired whether Randy was truly prepared to spend her entire life with Brian, urging her to consider the possibility of him facing disability or the potential challenge of not being able to have children. Randy's response was unwavering. "Mom," she declared, "I love him deeply, and I will stand by him always. My life will be dedicated to him and to our future children." Nancy, witnessing such profound devotion, recognized the authenticity of her daughter's love and embraced her decision. Driven by a desire to secure their future, Randy took on a second job, diligently saving every extra penny. She harbored the unspoken fear that Brian's health could decline at any moment, leaving her as the sole provider for their family. Despite his illness, Brian pressed on with his work. He was employed as a specialist at an insurance firm. It was there that Trimble first crossed paths with Blaine Norris, a computer technician. They bonded instantly, neither realizing that their newfound friendship would irrevocably alter the course of their lives. Blaine Norris was a married man with a son. To everyone, he seemed like a kind and gentle soul. Blaine, a former high school valedictorian and dedicated Boy Scout, juggled his studies with playing in the marching band and a part-time job at McDonald's. After graduation, Norris excelled in university, but his true aspiration lay elsewhere: Hollywood. Blaine harbored a deep passion for filmmaking, with a particular fondness for horror. In the early 2000s, Norris embarked on his most ambitious project yet, a film set along the rugged trails of the Appalachian Trail in Pennsylvania, one of the longest continuous footpath in the world. Over 3,500 kilometers away, Norris found himself captivated by the runaway success of the Blair Witch Project. The film's meager budget had yielded a fortune, a siren call that echoed in Blaine's ambitious heart. Blaine yearned to replicate that triumph. He envisioned a horror film, a descent into dread as a group of unsuspecting tourists met their gruesome ends, one by one. The film consumed Blaine. It was his burning passion, but passion alone wasn't enough. His directorial experience was virtually non-existent. When Blaine met Brian, he confided his dreams and meticulously laid out his grand vision. Yet, a harsh truth hung in the air. Tethered to his job as a computer technician, Blaine lacked both the time and the financial resources to bring his cinematic nightmare to life. Trium extended a helping hand to his colleague, offering his camera equipment and volunteering as the cinematographer. This act of generosity forged a stronger bond between the two men. Soon after, they secured an investor who contributed $18,000 to Norris's account. Blaine immediately put the funds to good use, acquiring props and selecting the ideal filming locations, as well as the perfect actors for the lead roles. After 3 months of dedicated work, Blaine Norris completed the screenplay for the film. He called it Death March. Here's the gist. 5 young hikers venture into the wilderness, only to be stalked and slain, one, by a vengeful spirit. Norris had cast his actors, assigning them their roles. Filming was on the brink of commencing, but fate intervened. Brian Trimble's illness took a turn for the worse. The man regretfully announced he was unable to serve as the cinematographer, as the rugged forest trails had become too challenging for him to navigate. An investor approached Norris, requesting to see photos of the cast members who had been chosen. After examining the pictures, the investor declared the film doomed to fail. He threatened to withdraw his funding of $18,000 unless Norris replaced the cinematographer. Norris, however, refused to dismiss his friend. The investor consequently took his money back, and Blaine's dreams of filming a movie and finding success in Hollywood started to fade. Despite this setback, he was determined to continue pursuing his goal. Norris estimated that he needed around $20,000 to complete the film. Trimble once again offered support to his friends, mentioning that he and his wife had savings. He offered to discuss the possibility of investing in the film with her. However, after speaking with Randy Bynum, Trimble's wife, he received a rejection. Randy believed a financial cushion was essential for a peaceful life, so she diligently saved every penny for unexpected expenses. She convinced her husband, Brian, to financially assist Norris. After speaking with Randy, Brian also decided against helping his friend as a cameraman. Instead of aiding Norris, Brian and Randy embarked on a cruise. Meanwhile, a disheartened Norris was undeterred. He resolved to make his horror film at any cost. Blaine took out multiple loans to hire actors and acquire equipment, even putting his home, where his wife and son lived, up for sale. Blaine's passion for filmmaking clashed with his domestic life. Despite his wife's growing frustration, he stubbornly persisted in his cinematic endeavor. Meanwhile, Trimble found himself increasingly stifled. He felt Randy's constant control over his life was unbearable. Their disagreements escalated, leading them to seek the counsel of a family psychologist. Following therapy, Brianna and Randy managed to mend their relationship and started planning for a child. Simultaneously, Blaine, with immense difficulty, pressed on with the production of his film, Lethal Trip. Then, one day, he returned home to discover his wife had taken their son and belongings, leaving him alone. Norris was drowning in debt and utterly alone. His only hope was Brian Trimble, a colleague and friend. Blaine clung to the belief that his film would be a success if only he could finish it. Trimble was blown away by Norris's footage, but he was also trapped, dominated by his wife, and unable to truly help his friend. Brian was sick of living under her thumb. Then, a dark thought crept into his mind: murdering Randy. Trimble, driven by greed, concocted a sinister plot to eliminate his wife and claim the $100,000 life insurance payout, along with the money she had diligently saved throughout their marriage. He confided in his friend, Blaine, revealing his treacherous scheme. Blaine, instead of dissuading him, embraced the idea, seeing it as an opportunity to finance his film project, Fatal Trek, and experience a thrill. Trimble promised Blaine $20,000 for his assistance in getting rid of Randy. Blaine readily agreed. For 7 long months, Brian Trimble meticulously planned every detail of the day he would become a widower. All the while, Randy continued toiling away at 2 jobs, completely unaware of the monster she lived with. Randy had been longing to conceive, diligently saving every penny in anticipation of the joyous arrival. Unbeknownst to many, the couple hadn't been using protection, hoping their dreams would soon materialize. Meanwhile, those closest to them began to notice a disturbing shift in Brian's behavior. He would often lash out at Randy, calling her foolish and controlling, complaining that she stifled him and demanded his every move be approved. In a chilling foreshadowing of the tragedy to come, Trimble sent a link to Nari containing a step-by-step guide on how to take a life. Finally, the fateful day arrived. On the 10th of January, 2003, Randy Trimble spent the entire day at work, unaware of the events that would soon unfold. Brian Trimble was at a restaurant, catching up with an old friend, unaware of the horror unfolding at his home. Meanwhile, hidden in the shadows of the Trimble family garage, a predator named Norris lay in wait for Randy Trimble to come home. As Randy arrived home from her job, unaware of what awaited her, Blake attacked her from behind, trying to strangle the life out of her. Randy Trimble lost consciousness and fell to the ground. The merciless Norris then struck her head against the unyielding concrete floor. As if that weren't enough, he proceeded to stab her 27 times. Later that evening, after his dinner, Brian Trimble returned home to a scene of unspeakable brutality. He dialed 911, his voice trembling as he reported his wife's murder. When the police arrived, they found Brian Trimble playing the part of a grieving husband. Chaos reigned within the house. Possessions were scattered across the floor, mimicking the aftermath of a brutal break-in. Yet, detectives soon discovered a peculiar detail. Nothing was actually missing. The scene, meticulously arranged, suggested a staged robbery. Suspicion immediately fell upon Brian Trimble. However, the case presented a frustrating challenge. A thorough search of the premises yielded no fingerprints, no trace of DNA. Moreover, Brian possessed an unshakable alibi. At the estimated time of the incident, he was dining with a friend at a restaurant, nearly 40 minutes away. The waiters and a friend vouched for Brian, placing him at a restaurant when Randy met her end. Yet, despite the alibi, detectives suspected Trimble's involvement in his wife's demise. Soon, a detective revisited Trimble's residence, urging Brian to recount the day he discovered Randy after his dinner out. Brian claimed he found his wife face down on the floor. He nudged her with his foot, even stepping in the blood. However, during the initial interrogation, Trimble stated he hadn't touched Randy's body. His narrative had shifted. 8 days before his wife's tragic death, Brian's computer history revealed a chilling discovery. Detectives found he had visited a website detailing step-by-step instructions for committing a crime, a link he then shared with Blaine Norris. This evidence was enough to bring Brian in for questioning. Despite the mounting suspicion, Brian maintained his innocence, clinging to his alibi. However, seasoned detectives were convinced of his guilt and devised a strategy to break him. They relentlessly pursued Trimble, inundating him with daily phone calls and making unannounced visits to his workplace and home, hoping to crack his composure and extract a confession. 4 months had barely passed after Randy's tragic death when the police summoned Brian to the station. Accompanied by his mother, Brian was met with a proposition: confess to the crime and receive a life sentence, thereby avoiding the death penalty. Hours later, Brian Trimble agreed to the deal. He requested his mother's departure from the interrogation room before revealing the chilling details of the planned crime. It was Blaine Norris, he confessed, who had murdered Randy in the garage. Acting on this information, the police launched a search for Norris, meticulously examining his house and car. Inside the vehicle, detectives discovered a receipt listing items Blaine had purchased shortly before the tragedy, the very items Trimble had described during his interrogation. Norris acquired black pants, a matching t-shirt, gloves, a face mask, and a knife. This very knife was used to inflict harm upon Randy. Following the incident, Brian Trimble and Blaine Norris were apprehended and charged with conspiracy in connection to the crime against Randy Trimble. Norris pleaded not guilty. During the trial, Trimble alleged that his confession had been coerced by law enforcement and questioned the effectiveness of his legal representation. Ultimately, both men were found guilty and sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Brian Trimble could have lived a life of freedom, surrounded by the love and support of his wife, who stood by him despite his health challenges. Instead, Trimble is destined to spend the remainder of his days behind bars. On the 7th of January, 2007, in the quiet countryside of Lawrence, Michigan, a fire erupted within the home of Toad and Linda Stermer. It was a typical Sunday afternoon. Linda was in the basement, attending to a load of laundry, while Toad relaxed in the living room, watching television. Around 3 p.m., Linda was startled by her husband's frantic shouts echoing from upstairs. Rushing to the living room, she was met with a horrifying sight. Flames had engulfed the room. According to Linda, Toad was standing amidst the blaze, desperately trying to extinguish the fire. She hadn't seen him, but the horrifying screams were unmistakable. Helpless to reach her husband, Linda fled the burning house, barefoot and coatless. Her cell phone was still inside, severing her ability to call for help. Her only option was to reach the nearest neighbor, and she knew her husband always kept a spare set of keys in his van. Linda climbed into the van. According to the weather forecast, a light rain mixed with snow had fallen earlier that day in their area. The muddy driveway presented an immediate challenge. The van stubbornly refused to budge. Its tires spun uselessly, finding no purchase on the slick surface. After a dozen futile attempts to gain traction, Linda's attention was abruptly drawn to the side window. Through it, she saw him emerge from the inferno that was once their home. She screamed for him to get in the car, but her voice seemed to fall on deaf ears. He was badly burned. Without hesitation, Linda leaped from the van and rushed towards her husband. "Get down! Roll!" she screamed, her voice laced with urgency, pleading with him to extinguish the flames engulfing his body and clothes. Linda raced back to the car, desperate to get closer and rush her husband to the hospital. As she navigated the treacherous, muddy terrain near their home, a wave of panic washed over her. She lost sight of him. Where had he gone? The ground was slick, the car unwieldy, its tires worn and old. Despite the challenging conditions, Linda carefully eased the vehicle forward, inching closer to the house, aiming for the sandy patch beside it. She hoped the traction would be better on this stretch. By then, neighbors had rushed to help, one dialing 911 to report the fire. Neighbors hurried to the woman, asking about her husband and sons. But Linda was in a full-blown panic. She was unresponsive to their questions. Her speech was rambling and incoherent. Linda gestured vaguely, indicating she'd last seen Todd near the front door. Having scoured the immediate vicinity, the neighbors found no trace of the man. Circling the inferno, their search led them to Todd, collapsed just a letter away from the house, precisely where Linda had parked the van. He was prone, his head facing the burning structure. Linda vehemently denied any knowledge of how her husband had managed to crawl that far. Todd was severely burned. His clothes were almost entirely consumed by the flames. A neighbor gently covered him with his own work clothes. He was still alive, but speech eluded him. His eyes alone conveyed his agony. Linda, his wife, rushed to his side, her voice breaking with sobs as she begged him not to leave her. The wail of sirens grew louder as police cars, a fire engine, and an ambulance descended upon the scene. Medical personnel worked desperately to save Todd. Their attempts to use a defibrillator were thwarted by the extensive burns that ravaged his body. The 42-year-old Stermer succumbed to his injuries near his home, a victim of severe burns and carbon monoxide poisoning. Later, investigators discovered traces of blood on the van's bumper and undercarriage. Linda had inadvertently run over her husband. She claimed absolute ignorance of how or when the incident occurred, insisting she never intended to harm him. After the firefighters extinguished the blaze, detectives began their investigation, meticulously examining the scene and questioning close friends and neighbors. Her twin sons, Stermer and Trendon, who lived with their parents, asserted they knew their mother well. They immediately suspected there was more to the fire than met the eye. Linda carried a secret, or so her sons believed. Trevor, one of her sons, voiced the unthinkable, questioning if she had run over their father. Her response was a flood of tears and a refusal to discuss it. The sons found it impossible to believe that their father, a man in prime physical condition, could have been so consumed by the flames, while their mother emerged unscathed. They revealed that their parents' relationship had soured in recent times. Arguments had become frequent, and divorce was openly discussed. 24 hours before the fire, Todd and Linda had engaged in a fight witnessed by the twins. The scandal erupted when Todd discovered rumors of Linda's infidelity. Linda vehemently denied the allegations. She insisted on her unwavering loyalty, countering that Todd was consumed by jealousy and unfounded suspicions. Linda admitted to a fight the night before the fire, but attributed the argument to their dire financial situation. Todd's struggling business, dealing in gloves and occasional hunting suits, had pushed their family to the brink of ruin. She confessed that her husband's frequent laziness and unwillingness to work added to their troubles. Recently, she discovered he was borrowing money from his mother. Linda confronted Todd, questioning, "Why do you need to do that? Why not just earn the money yourself?" Linda worked tirelessly at a dialysis center. Each workday began with a very early wake-up call, requiring her to be at her workplace by 5 a.m. She revealed that Todd was burdened with significant debts, approximately $75,000. He had fallen behind on mortgage payments for several months, seemingly prioritizing his own desires. However, their sons, Trenton and Trevor, countered that their mother often spent the family savings on her hobby. Linda's life revolved around horses. Her husband grew increasingly frustrated with her dedication and the financial resources she poured into her 30 horses. Linda possessed a credit card with a $25,000 limit and often found herself accumulating debt. The Stermer's marriage was strained by constant arguments about the horses, though Linda maintained that they were a source of income. She admitted that her husband had threatened her, stating that if the animals didn't start earning their keep, he would find a way to get rid of them. As investigators delved into Linda Stermer's past, they uncovered more questions than answers, meticulously retracing her steps from that fateful day. It was discovered that Linda had made an early morning trip to the gas station. The gas station attendant had a hunch. The woman seemed to be filling a gas can, not a car. Turns out, he was right. In the yard of the Stermer residence, police discovered an empty can with traces of gasoline. Linda claimed she'd run out of milk that morning. She'd gone to the store for groceries and decided to stop at the gas station while she was out. The receipt she provided showed she'd only spent $11 on gas. Linda insisted she didn't need to fill up her SUV. She'd just put in a little, enough to make sure her sons had fuel for their upcoming trip. Having arrived home, she gently roused her sons, persuading them to take a trip to the movies with a friend in her SUV. She handed them some money and the car keys. Linda later told investigators she was aware that she and her husband were heading for another tumultuous argument that day, and she desperately wanted to shield the boys from witnessing it. She confessed she had been planning to tell her husband about her decision to seek a divorce. She had even consulted with a divorce lawyer, solidifying her resolve. She planned to pack her belongings and leave their home that very day. It was a difficult decision, she admitted, after being married to her husband for 13 years. In 1989, a chance encounter sparked a flame between Linda and a certain go-getter, both 25 years of age. An undeniable attraction ignited instantly. Linda, amidst the complexities of divorcing her first husband, found herself a mother of 2 little girls, a 3-year-old and a 2-year-old. Fast forward a couple of years, and their bond deepened into marriage. By August of 1993, joy filled their home with the arrival of twin sons, Trevor and Trenton. The brothers fondly recall their father as a monumental figure in their lives, a true hero. He passionately coached and trained them in various sports. Physical fitness held a special place in the man's heart. Beyond his love for sports, he was a devoted family man. Showing his immense care, he and Linda even opened their hearts and home to a 2-year-old nephew who found himself alone in the world. The Stermer family lived together, a multi-generational household filled with parents and grandparents. Their nephew was considered one of their own, accepted as a member of the family. However, Linda began to notice a change in him, a frequent display of his temper. Ashley Gibson, Linda's daughter from a previous marriage, once witnessed him throwing a laundry basket at her mother. He also started spending more time with friends, disappearing at night, returning home drunk and aggressive. He would yell at Linda, leaving her to manage the entire household alone. When Ashley turned 11, she also became the target of his outbursts. He would scream at the girl, calling her names, and cruelly compare her to her mother. He was physically abusive towards Ashley, striking her with both his hands and a belt. Linda corroborated this, admitting that she too had been subjected to his violence. One incident stands out. In a fit of rage, he struck her across the face. The blow left a bruise, and in its aftermath, he sent flowers, profusely apologizing for his actions. However, this cycle of violence and remorse would repeat itself time and again. Intriguingly, his sons dispute these accounts. They claim to have never witnessed their father resorting to physical violence against their mother or sisters. They had never witnessed any visible bruises on Linda's face. However, one of her sons acknowledged that his father had a fiery temper and occasionally gripped his mother's arm forcefully. Linda's mother confessed that she had never fully trusted Todd, stating, "He could be charming, even the most captivating man you'd ever meet, but he could turn on you and become the worst person imaginable." According to the mother, Todd constantly sought to control her daughter, invariably blaming Linda when something went wrong. Her mother admitted that she had been constantly worried about her daughter. Linda had revealed that even before marrying Todd, she was aware of his previous legal troubles. Stermer harbored a past marred by 2 convictions: substance-related offenses, driving under the influence, and a battery conviction stemming from a minor assault. On the eve of the fire, January the 6th, 2007, 20-year-old Ashley Gibson recounted a disquieting phone call she made to her home. Her intention was to speak with her mother, but her stepfather answered, stating her mother wasn't there. He then chillingly added he had had a conversation with God. He had not decided yet, but one of us will leave this house in a body bag, either myself or your mother. Following Todd's tragic death, detectives embarked on a 2-year investigation into the family. Their investigation led them to the conclusion that Linda struck her husband with a vehicle as he escaped the burning home. On June the 5th, 2009, prosecutors determined they had amassed sufficient evidence to arrest both Linda and Stermer, charging them with arson and the murder of her spouse. On January 5th, 2010, Linda faced her trial. The evidence presented was largely circumstantial, focusing on Linda's actions leading up to and following the tragic fire. Her sons testified that on that fateful Sunday morning, their mother had insisted they go to the cinema with unusual urgency, forbidding them from saying goodbye to their father, claiming he was asleep. In court, the sons speculated that their mother might have administered a large dose of sedatives or even illicit substances to him. This theory found support in the testimony of Kate Fox, Linda's former friend and colleague. Fox recounted that, in the aftermath of the tragedy, Linda confided in her, expressing deep fear that investigators would discover a coffee cup she allegedly used to drug Todd with illegal substances. However, the autopsy revealed no evidence indicating that Todd had been under the influence of any such substances. Fox, a former confidant of Linda's, testified to a chilling detail. Linda had allegedly confided in her about ways to get rid of her husband, even suggesting running him over with a car. Linda vehemently denied Fox's claims, attributing them to workplace animosity. She asserted that Fox harbored resentment towards her due to professional setbacks. Further complicating matters, Fox revealed Linda's affair with a colleague named Chris Williams. Williams himself corroborated the story, admitting to a romantic relationship with the married Stermer prior to the tragic incident. While Linda didn't deny the affair with Williams, she maintained that it began after she became a widow. She accused Fox of manipulating Williams into giving false testimony in court as an act of revenge. Linda's lawyer presented evidence suggesting her friend, Kate Fox, suffered from a mental illness. Further complicating matters, Kate's own brother testified in court, casting doubt on her reliability. Adding another layer to the narrative, a gas station attendant recounted seeing Linda with Stermer that very morning. He vividly remembered her paying for gasoline and filling a canister near the rear of her SUV. Linda, however, refuted the claim that she had filled any canister. She explained that it was an exceptionally cold morning and her hands were numb with cold. After paying for the fuel, she had simply retrieved a pair of gloves from the back seat of her car to warm her hands, then filled her car with petrol and returned home. She also pointed out the presence of several canisters on their property, common occurrences given their large farm with its 30 horses. While incarcerated, Linda allegedly confessed to her cellmate that she deliberately set their house ablaze while her husband was asleep. To another fellow inmate, Linda reportedly admitted to striking her husband on the head. The prosecution asserted that Linda doused the slumbering Todd with gasoline before igniting him. Traces of gasoline were indeed found on Todd's athletic pants, underwear, and socks. However, investigators also discovered gasoline residue on the clothing of a neighbor who had covered the injured Todd as he lay on the ground. Linda's defense attorney argued that the neighbor's employment at a junkyard could explain the presence of gasoline on Todd. Furthermore, traces of gasoline were detected on a towel Linda had laundered in the basement laundry before the fire erupted. Linda insisted that he had been repairing the furnace that day, leaving him covered in fuel oil. The towels reeked, and she desperately tried to wash the stench away. Linda's lawyer argued that he was the one who started the fire, ultimately perishing in his own destructive act. Investigators found no trace of gasoline on Linda's clothing. It also came to light that he had been a suspect in 2 previous arson investigations. 2 other houses owned by the man had mysteriously burned to the ground. On both occasions, he was deeply in debt and facing significant financial strain. The prosecutor dismissed it as nonsense, emphasizing that after he escaped the burning house, Linda struck him with her car and didn't even call 911. Pointing directly at Linda, the prosecutor called her cunning, manipulative, and truly diabolical. In 2010, 3 years after Todd Stermer's death, the verdict was delivered. Linda Stermer was found guilty of arson and first-degree murder. Her family fractured into 2 camps, ceasing all communication. The sons sided with their deceased father, while the daughters stood by their mother. Linda Stermer received a life sentence without the possibility of parole. The ordeal was far from over. For the next 5 years, Linda relentlessly fought for her freedom, filing appeal after appeal through the state court system, all the way up to the Michigan Supreme Court. Each attempt was met with rejection. Undeterred, Linda then turned to the federal court, arguing that her initial trial had been compromised by her lawyer's decision not to bring in a fire expert. This expert, she believed, could have proven the fire at the Sterner home was accidental. According to this experienced investigator, the initial fire investigation had been conducted negligently. The investigation stumbled early on when the police collected an insufficient number of charred debris samples for thorough forensic analysis. A key expert witness argued that the investigators lacked concrete evidence to support the claim that Linda had doused Todd with gasoline and ignited the fatal blaze. When questioned, 30 firefighters reportedly scoffed at the very idea that someone soaked in gasoline could have escaped the inferno unaided. Addressing the presence of gasoline traces on the victim's clothing, the expert posited that the neighbor, in a moment of compassion, might have inadvertently transferred fuel onto Todd when he covered him with his work jacket, which also bore traces of gasoline. The expert suggested Todd Stermer himself could have deliberately started the fire only to become trapped by the rapidly spreading flames. Linda, in stark contrast, emerged from the incident unscathed. Her clothing was notably free of any traces of flammable fuel. In 2016, a new lawyer took on Linda's case and filed an amended petition incorporating findings from a fire expert. This led to a retrial for the Stermer family, presided over by a federal judge in October of 2018, 2 years later. During the proceedings, Linda offered a theory. Perhaps a stray ember had tumbled from their living room fireplace, igniting the floor. 2 months later, just before Christmas in 2018, the judge delivered his verdict. He criticized the prosecution for misleading the jury about Linda possessing 2 cell phones, stating there was no evidence to support this claim. The judge also faulted Linda's defense, arguing her lawyer had undermined her case by not calling a fire expert immediately following the tragic event. The judge acknowledged that while the testimonies of Linda and Kate Fox's former friend were compromising, she genuinely suffered from mental health issues. In December of 2018, nearly 12 years after the fire, Linda Stermer's conviction was overturned, and the judge ordered her release. By then, she had spent around 9 years behind bars. In 2019, after Linda Stermer had been free for about a year, the Michigan Attorney General filed an appeal, seeking to reinstate Linda's conviction. Her daughters feared their mother would be sent back to prison. On December 3, 2019, Linda Stermer, her daughters, and her mother arrived at the hearing. This time, the judge shifted the focus from the house fire to the fact that Linda had run over her husband with a car. Linda vehemently maintained that she hadn't run him over intentionally. She insisted it was a moment of sheer panic, a blur she couldn't quite grasp. There was never any desire to harm her husband, certainly not to end his life. In the year 2020, the appellate court sided with Linda Stermer, upholding the judge's decision to overturn her conviction, but the prosecution was far from backing down. The legal battles persist. Linda attends every hearing, cherishing her newfound freedom. Currently, she resides with her daughter, Ashley. She works diligently, saving every penny, dreaming of a new house, a place where her fractured family can one day reunite. Her sons, however, no longer call her Mom. To them, she is simply Linda. The brothers could not forgive her for the death of their beloved father. Even after the woman's release from custody, they remained convinced that she was the one who took their dear father, Todd Stermer, away from them.